I was standing there with my key already halfway in the lock when a woman I had never seen in my life told me calmly and without the slightest hesitation that I didn't belong in my own house. And before my brain could even catch up to what she'd said, she already had her phone out and was calling the police on me, like this was something she'd done so many times it barely registered as a human interaction anymore. That single sentence split my life cleanly into two parts. Before it, I still believed that if you followed the rules, did your homework, crossed every T and dotted every I, things would mostly work out in the end. After it, I learned how fragile that belief really is when someone with authority decides you're an inconvenience. They want erased. And I know how this sounds. I really do. If you're listening to this thinking there's no way someone actually does this in real life, I get it. A year earlier, I would have said the same thing. I would have shrugged and said this was one of those exaggerated HOA horror stories people tell online to rack up views. But standing there, with my wife just a few steps behind me and my son frozen on the porch clutching his backpack, like it was a life vest, I realized this wasn't a story anymore. This was happening. And it was only the opening scene. So let me take you back, because none of this makes sense without the before. The house sat just outside a quiet town most people passed through without ever slowing down. A gentle hill, old trees that leaned like they were tired but proud. A long gravel driveway and a porch that creaked in a familiar way, like it recognized you. It had belonged to my Uncle Daniel. He was the kind of man who fixed things slowly and deliberately, like rushing would somehow insult the house. He believed places remembered how you treated them. If you respected them, they took care of you in return. Growing up, I spent summers there. I remembered the smell of sawdust in his workshop, the way he'd sit on the porch in the evenings with a glass of iced tea, not saying much, just watching the light change. That house wasn't just property to him. It was a relationship. When he passed, and the property came to me, it felt like a responsibility more than a gift. No mortgage. No HOA. No hidden clauses buried in fine print. I didn't just assume that part. I verified it. County records. Zoning maps. Title search. I even paid extra for an independent review because I didn't want surprises later. Everything came back clean. Boring even. Exactly what you want when you're about to move your family somewhere you plan to stay for a long time. My wife Megan fell in love with the house immediately. She said it felt honest. Like it wasn't pretending to be anything it wasn't. My son Eli didn't care about any of that. He ran through the empty rooms, echoing his footsteps, and immediately claimed the bedroom with the biggest window so he could see the stars at night. He asked if coyotes ever came that close. I told him sometimes. He smiled like that was a feature, not a problem. For me, it felt like relief. Like stepping out of years of noise, rules, and cramped living into something that finally let us breathe. Moving day felt right. The sun hit the house just right. The moving truck rumbled up the drive. We were exhausted, stressed, but happy. I remember standing there with a cup of terrible gas station coffee thinking, this is it. This is where life finally slows down. This is where we stop feeling temporary. Then the SUV showed up. It didn't pull in politely. It slid sideways into the driveway, blocking the moving truck like it was asserting dominance. Out stepped this woman, mid-50s maybe, hair perfect, jacket pressed, posture so straight it looked practiced. She didn't smile. She didn't introduce herself. She just pointed at me and said, "You can't live here. This move-in hasn't been approved." I laughed. I honestly couldn't help it. It came out automatically because what else do you do when someone says something that ridiculous? I told her I thought she had the wrong address. She smiled then, tight, controlled. I'm the president of the Ridgeview Commons Homeowners Association. This property falls under our jurisdiction. That was the first time my stomach tightened. I told her it didn't. I told her I had paperwork. I even held it up, standing there with boxes stacked behind me and my kid watching everything quietly. She didn't look. She waved it away like a menu she'd already memorized. Said the boundaries had been updated the year before. Said I needed to vacate until the board reviewed my eligibility. Eligibility. From my own house. When I told her no, that this wasn't happening. She didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She just called the police right there, in front of my family, like this was all part of the plan. 2 deputies showed up. You could tell they were tired, polite, used to being dragged into neighborhood disputes that never should have been their problem. They looked at my documents, then at her thick binder full of glossy pages, color-coded tabs, and highlighted nonsense. One of them finally said what I had been waiting to hear. HOA rules don't override county law. If the county says this property isn't part of the HOA, then it isn't. I felt relief wash over me. She smiled. If that's the case, she said calmly, then this is a civil matter. We'll handle it accordingly. At the time, I didn't understand why that sentence stuck with me. I do now, because once the police left, the pressure started. Quietly, carefully. Like someone testing how far they could push without setting off alarms. It started with small things. A car parked at the edge of the road late at night, engine idling, never getting out. A laminated HOA notice zip-tied to one of my trees like a territorial marker. Our trash cans mysteriously violated rules we'd never been given. Our mail stopped coming. I called the post office and found out someone had filed a forwarding request to the HOA office in my name. That's when I realized this wasn't about rules or paperwork. It was about control. About someone deciding they didn't like the idea of a house they couldn't dominate. Neighbors started acting strange, too. Some waved and smiled but wouldn't stop to talk. Others whispered quick warnings when no one else was around. One older man told me she's been trying to get that land for years. Then he looked around and walked away like he'd said too much. That comment stayed with me, trying to get the land. Suddenly, a lot of things made sense. The confidence, the persistence, the way she never seemed worried, the way she acted like time was on her side. Then one morning, I stepped outside and found concrete barriers blocking my driveway. Big ones. Industrial, spray-painted bright orange with the words HSS only. That was the moment confusion turned into anger. I started documenting everything. Not to be dramatic. Not for attention. Because something felt calculated. Like pressure applied slowly enough to stay just inside the law, but constant enough to make you crack. I filmed dates, times, faces, license plates. I kept copies in 3 different places. I wrote things down even when it felt pointless. I posted one video online. No rant, no yelling, just evidence. It spread faster than I ever expected. People shared similar stories. Some from the same town, some from completely different states. A few former HOA board members messaged me quietly and said, "This is exactly how it starts." Others told me they'd been bullied into selling, fined into leaving, worn down until it was easier to give up. And I realized something terrifying. This wasn't rare. This was a system working exactly as designed when the wrong person was in charge. And I think that attention is what made her escalate. Because a few days later, I woke up to the sound of chainsaws, real ones, in my yard. A crew in matching vests was cutting down my uncle's hedges, ripping out pathway lights, sawing through the gazebo he'd built with his own hands years earlier. When I ran out yelling for them to stop, one of them shouted back that they were bringing the property up to community standards. And then I saw her, standing by her SUV, sunglasses on, arms crossed, smiling like this was a service she was proud of, like she was doing the neighborhood a favor. I called the police again. They came. They took pictures. They apologized. And they told me again it was a civil dispute. That night, my son had nightmares. He woke up crying, asking if the house was going to disappear. My wife didn't sleep at all. She just sat at the kitchen table, staring at the window like she was waiting for something else to happen. And something in me finally settled into place. Not fear, not rage. Resolve. The next day, a knock came at the door. A young guy stood there, nervous, eyes darting like he was afraid someone might see him. He said his name was Aaron. Said he worked for the HOA. He handed me a USB drive and told me I needed to listen to it, but not around my kid. It had emails, fake boundary maps, step-by-step instructions on how to fabricate violations, and an audio recording of her voice, calm and confident, saying if the law won't handle him, we'll bury him in violations until he leaves. That was the moment everything shifted. I hired a lawyer that afternoon, a real one. The kind who listens more than he talks. When I finished telling him everything, he leaned back, quiet for a long moment, then said, "This isn't an HOA dispute. This is harassment, fraud, and abuse of authority." The legal process wasn't fast, and it wasn't clean. There were sleepless nights, stacks of paperwork, depositions that felt more like psychological warfare than legal procedure. There were moments when Megan asked if we should just leave, sell the place, start over somewhere quieter. And every time, I thought about my uncle, about the way he treated that house, about how wrong it felt to let someone bully us out of something that wasn't theirs. Court finally came. And in that courtroom, everything unraveled. The forged documents, the emails, the recordings, the property damage, the pattern of intimidation. Neighbors testified. Aaron testified. Experts explained how the maps were altered. The judge didn't yell. She didn't need to. Her voice was calm when she ruled against her on every count. Fraud, abuse of authority, property destruction, conspiracy. The HOA was placed under receivership. Damages were awarded. Criminal review was ordered. They walked her out in handcuffs. I thought that would feel triumphant. It didn't. It felt quiet. Heavy. Like the end of a long storm where you're not sure yet what's been damaged underneath. Because what nobody really talks about is the aftermath. The quiet part. The part where your body keeps reacting long after the danger is gone. For months, every car that slowed near the driveway made my chest tighten. For months, my son asked if the lady was coming back. My wife flinched every time someone knocked on honey. The hedges grew back. The gazebo was rebuilt, stronger than before. On the outside, everything looked normal again. Inside, something had changed. I learned how easily systems meant to maintain order can become weapons in the wrong hands. I learned how thin the line is between a civil dispute and outright abuse when someone knows exactly how far they can push. And I learned that silence is often what people like her depend on. A year later, the house is quiet again. The porch still creaks. My son laughs in the yard. My wife sits on the steps in the evening like she finally believes we're safe. But sometimes, late at night, I think about how close we came to losing everything. Not because we were wrong, but because someone with power didn't like being told no. So here's what I want to ask you. If we hadn't documented everything, if we hadn't pushed back, if we decided it was easier to walk away, how many people do you think this kind of system has already crushed quietly, without a courtroom, without a verdict, without anyone ever hearing their story? Tell me what you think in the comments. Was this justice, or was it just luck? And if you've ever dealt with an HOA, you already know why this story doesn't feel exaggerated at all.